Welcome to my 271st video on my work with OO gauge. This video will feature 3 Dapol kits for LMS coaches. I will build the 3 coaches from the kits and then finish with a bit of running video. I bought these 3 as new items here in Canada where I live. The kits are marked Kitmaster as well as with the Dapol brand. These kits still seem to be fairly generally available, but they don't seem to be listed as products by Dapol anymore, so I suppose they must now be out of production. I got 2 kits for LMS 60-foot corridor composite coaches and 1 kit for a 57-foot LMS corridor brake. I decided to start with one of the composite coaches. Note that the 3950 at the bottom is the running number of the coach. Here you can see the contents of the kit as they came in a plastic bag stapled to the top card. This method of packing is presumably cheaper and simpler for shipping and stocking than putting the kits into boxes, but it does make breakages more likely, and indeed 2 of my 3 kits had broken parts. And here are the contents unpacked from the main bag. Coach roof, chassis, windows and seats, all as individual long parts. Coach body in a separate bag to protect the paintwork, I assume. A bag of miscellaneous small parts and a single folded sheet of instructions. Here's the coach body out of its bag. The lining, LMS lettering, running number and class numbers came pre-applied to the body. The only marking missing was the LMS logo roundel. And here are the contents of the small parts bag. Corridor connectors, couplings and coupling mounts, bogies pre-fitted with metal wheels in this case, a sprue of coach roof ventilators, a metal weight, and a small sheet with decals for LMS roundels. Note that the hook has come off one of the couplings. This was a problem with a couple of the kits. I noticed immediately on unpacking this kit that one of the buffers was broken off from the chassis. The broken off part was not in the main bag, so I assumed that this breakage must have occurred before the kit was packed, unless someone unpacked it, messed with it, and then stapled it back up again. I got out a spare buffer as close as I could manage in shape and size. I measured the shaft of my replacement buffer. Then I fitted an appropriately sized bit into a pin vise and drilled out the inner buffer shaft on the chassis. I didn't want to try to drill too deeply, so I cut down the shaft of my replacement buffer so that it could be fitted into a relatively shallow hole. I used polycement to glue the replacement buffer in place. Not a perfect repair, but I believe it will pass muster when viewed from any distance. The instructions were only printed on one side of the paper and were fairly simple, though not entirely without wrinkles. Here's the upper part of the instructions at a more readable size. And here are the rest of the instructions. The first thing the instructions said to do was to bend the clips sticking up from the chassis. This seemed a bit odd to me. If the clips needed to be angled inwards, why didn't they make them that way? The instruction about bending the clips referred forward to a note in another instruction. And here is that note in the other instruction. So apparently the chassis clips need to be bent inwards so that the window parts can get between the tops of the clips and the sides of the body, and so clip into place. I dutifully, but very gently and rather nervously, bent the clips inwards. I read instruction 2 and looked at the coach body and was initially a bit confused. The instruction is perfectly correct, but it needs to be read carefully and thought about. It says that the side of the body without lavatory windows should face towards you, so the side with the lavatory windows should face away from you. The lavatory windows are the single windows next to the end doors. Before proceeding with assembly, a couple of parts needed some painting. I masked the coach body so that I could spray paint the ends black. Here's the body back from spray painting. It's hard to get the tape 100% stuck down along an uneven edge like this, so some paint got where I didn't want it on the coach sides. Because I more or less expected this, I removed the masking tape when the paint was only partially dry, and I used mineral spirits on cotton buds to clean off the unwanted paint on the sides. I also spray painted the seating and compartment part brown. Before mounting the body onto the chassis, the corridor connectors need to be slid up into the ends of the body from the bottom. They don't need to be glued, as the chassis will hold them in place when the coach is assembled. The body is then put onto the chassis, taking care to get both the correct way round. This initial fit of the body is quite loose. Things will not be held tightly together until the window parts are clipped to the chassis and then the roof is clipped to the window parts. There was a gap in the floor of the body to leave space for the metal weight. Here is the weight fitted into that gap. The fit was not particularly tight. Once the metal weight is in place, the part for the compartments is placed on top. You can see that there are 7 compartments with a lavatory at each end. The lavatories, of course, need to face the lavatory windows. Next, the window glazing needs to be fitted. This is the trickiest part of assembling these kits, and the instructions do give fairly clear warning of this. Once you make sure you've got the correct glazing part and you've got it the right way round, you need to force the glazing part down between the side of the coach body and the ends of the compartment part. The fit is tight and needs force with a bit of bending of the body side. Once the glazing part is between the body side and the compartment part, the glazing needs to be pushed down very firmly all along to make the slots in it clip over the clips from the chassis, the ones we were told to bend inwards. Then the raised glazing for each individual window needs to be pressed into place in the window holes, again a tight fit requiring considerable force. On the compartment side, I was able to do this with finger and thumb. Next, the glazing for the other side needed to be forced between the coach side and the corridor part. This second side was harder to get in, as the first side stopped the corridor part from moving over. Here you can see the glazing part in place, but with the individual raised glazing not yet forced into the window holes. This side was more difficult to do, as there wasn't enough room to squeeze firmly with finger and thumb. I just couldn't get some of the glazing into the window holes with my fingers on this side. So I resorted to what the instructions recommended, cushioning the body to protect the painted outer surface and then pushing the glazing into the window holes with the flat end of my tweezers. The instructions actually suggested using a screwdriver. Of course, whilst using force to get parts to go together, you have to be careful not to break things, especially the fragile pieces sticking down from the chassis. At this point, the coach is assembled, except for the roof and the bogies. The only real small part assembly required for this kit was fitting ventilators to the roof. Here is the roof together with the ventilator parts. The kit did provide a few more ventilators than required, which was just as well, as they were very fiddly to fit and easy to lose. The illustration in the instructions wasn't really clear enough for me to tell how the ventilators should be orientated as they were fitted, and the verbal instructions didn't clarify at all. I looked at some existing coach models that I had. This is the roof of a mainline coach. The ventilators on this one are a bit crude. Here's a picture of a model coach with finely moulded ventilators. It would seem that the intakes of the ventilators would be on either side of the circular centre part, and those intakes should face the sides of the coach. I noticed that the wires or pipes at the ends of the roof appeared to have been rather crudely sanded off. I didn't initially consider it impossible that this was done when the kit was manufactured and packed, but in hindsight it seems to me more likely that someone had opened this kit and messed with it at some point, although I bought it as new stock. Since those pipes were mostly sanded off, I smoothed the ends of the roof a bit more with some fine sanding paper. The ventilator parts were really tiny, and their shape made them hard to pick up in tweezers, but I couldn't hold and fit them without tweezers, so I did my best to pick them up with tweezers and then to force the stem of the ventilator into the hole in the roof. The fit was tight, and they would, I think, have stayed in place fine without gluing. The stems of the ventilators were at a slight angle from the heads. I didn't really know which way round they should go, but I did my best to get them all the same. Trying to pick up the ventilators with tweezers required repeated attempts, and there was really no way to hold them that made it easy to force the stems into the holes in the roof. I didn't worry too much about exact alignment when first forcing the ventilators into the holes. I used pliers to straighten them up afterwards. I don't think that those look too bad, and as I say, I don't think they really needed gluing. Nevertheless, I did get out some poly-cement, and I applied a tiny drop to the shaft of each ventilator where it came out of the hole on the inside. The glue did not show from the top of the roof. The roof then needed to be clipped onto the coach. The roof clipped on by means of jaws coming down from the roof, clipping over tabs protruding inwards from the glazing parts. I pushed the roof down firmly all along each side, clipping it tightly into place. Next, attention turned to the bogies. I wasn't too clear about this business of fitting the coupling retainers the right way round. This is the picture-provided reassembly of the bogies. And here are the coupling retainer parts and the end of one of the bogies where one of those retainers should fit. Basically, the slots on the sides of the retainers are a bit to one side of the hole in the middle, and the slots should be towards the end of the bogie. The ends of the retainers will then clip over the bogie, holding the retainer in place. Then the couplings are snapped into the fittings. Trying Hornby used this type of coupling for a while before NEM couplings became more or less standard. The kit provided pegs with clips on the end for pivoting the bogies. The peg pushes in from the bottom of the bogie. Then the clips on the end of the peg are pushed through the hole in the chassis seen here. And here is that bogie pivoted on the peg. Note that the bottom of the chassis is marked mainline. Does this indicate that all of the parts for these kits basically originated with mainline toolings? Only this small illustration at the top of the instructions indicated where the LMS logo roundels should be applied. I did confirm this by looking at pictures from other sources. Centered under the most central full-sized window just below the lining seems to have been the standard place. By the way, I had considered creating blinds for the lavatory windows, as I've done when fitting glazing to other coaches, but in this case the lavatory windows came with frosted glazing. These were the only decals provided with the kit for the LMS roundels. These were water slide decals, and I applied them with the help of some microset. I was quite impressed by the quality of these decals, with multiple colours and the tiny lettering quite readable. So there's that first composite coach completed. And here's the other side of that coach with the lavatory windows. I had two other kits, one for another composite just with a different running number and one for a 57-foot corridor brake. Here are the contents of the brake kit, basically pretty much the same as for the first composite kit. One difference was that the first kit came with bogies with pre-mounted metal wheels, whereas in this case the wheels were plastic and did not come mounted to the bogies. Here are the body and interior parts for the brake coach. I got out the body and interior parts for the other composite coach as well, so that I could spray paint them all at the same time. I masked the ends of both bodies. And here are those bodies back after I sprayed the ends black. As before, I removed the masking tape when the paint was only partially dry and cleaned up any unwanted paint on the coach sides with mineral spirits on a cotton bud. The instructions for this kit were almost exactly the same as for the first composite, except for minor differences because of the different body and interior. For some reason the pictures showed the coach body in grey rather than crimson as it actually came. Here are the parts from the small bag for the brake kit, the same as before except for the plastic wheels, which did have metal axles. I mounted the pinpoint ends of the axles into the bogies. They just went into holes in the plastic with no separate bearings. As with my first kit, one of the couplings came with its hook detached, and I spent the best part of an hour trying to fix this. The hook just didn't want to stay on. I eventually managed to get it to more or less stay on by cutting the slot in it deeper with a cutting disc in a rotary tool, and then drilling out the end of that slot with a pin vise. Again, I found the wording of the instruction regarding orientation of the body a bit confusing. We're told to ensure that the side of the coach with the ducket on the right-hand end is facing us. Here's the ducket on one side of the coach body. And here's the ducket on the other side of the coach body. So the significant point is that we need to orientate the body with the duckets, which are on both sides, to the right. Here's the body on the chassis with the metal weight in place. Again, quite a bit of play around the weight. In this case, the glazing parts came still attached to a sprue. I was able to mount the glazing parts and to get all of the raised glazing pushed into the window holes, though I did actually have to use a screwdriver to push the end glazing on the corridor side into place, with lots of force. Here you can see the end of the roof with the ventilators in place and glued. You can also see here the claws on the roof that clip round the tabs on the top of the glazing parts. I fitted the coupling retainers and couplings to the bogies and clipped the bogies onto the coach. And here is that 57-foot brake coach completed. Next I unpacked the second composite kit. I found that again one of the buffers was broken off. In this case the broken off buffer was in the bottom of the main bag, together with some other odds and ends. Here's what was in the bottom of the main bag: the sprue from the glazing parts, the decals, two of the ventilator parts, and the broken off buffer. I don't know how the decals and the ventilators got loose in the main bag, as the small parts bag still appeared to be sealed. In this case the pipes or wire conduits on the ends of the roof were in place and no attempt had been made to sand them off. I did my best to glue the broken off buffer back in place with polycement, but it was a bit dubious, since I was just trying to glue a thin shaft end to end. The contents of the small parts bag were the same as for the brake coach, i.e. with plastic wheels not fitted to the bogies. For some reason the two bogies were taped together. Getting the glazing into place was most difficult with this kit. I really had to do a lot of forcing with the flat end of my tweezers to get the glazing into the window holes. Whilst I was doing that, the broken buffer came off again. I gave up on gluing on the broken part and resorted to drilling the shaft to fit a replacement buffer. Here's that end of the coach after the second repair of the broken buffer. With the other two kits, the ventilator parts were the same colour as the roof. In this case, the ventilator parts were made of a significantly darker plastic. This darker plastic was also harder, making it even more difficult to force the ventilator shafts into the holes in the roof. I got all of the ventilators in place, aligned them properly with pliers, and then glued them on the inside. I clipped the roof into place. This was the only kit of the three that came with both couplings actually working and not requiring repair. And there's that second composite coach completed. Note the different running number, 3934 in this case. And here are all three coaches on the bench. I took the three kit-built coaches down to my Bachmann Easy Track layout in the basement for a little running, hooking them up behind a Bachmann Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway Class 5 tank engine in LMS Crimson livery. There they are, going over the level crossing on that layout. So now let's see a little running to finish. So let me just finish up with some video of a brief run with these kit-built Dapol coaches, or whatever you want to call them. They actually say mainline on the bottom of the chassis, because I guess they date back to the mainline days. This is the first one I built, the composite, which for some reason has the whatever they are at the end of the roof scraped off. I didn't scrape them off, they came like that. The next one is also a composite but doesn't have those scraped off, and for some reason has its ventilators made of a darker coloured plastic. And then that's the brake coach, which was actually in some ways in the best condition of the three kits I did. It was the only one that didn't have some form of breakage or whatever. I had to repair broken buffers on the other two, and there were the other odd little issues here and there. Anyway, there they are. Now I've got them behind a Bachmann, a sort of pretty much current production Bachmann, I don't remember what year it came out, not very long ago. Bachmann model of the Lancashire and Yorkshire tank engine. Unusual wheel arrangement, 242. Yes, it's a Lancashire and Yorkshire 242 tank in LMS maroon. And we're on the downstairs layout here, built with Bachmann Easy Track. Seems to work well, except that, what was I going to say, I don't have a handheld controller for it, so... This engine is geared quite low, I find. And that's quite a... well, that's 50% on the MRC2 controller I use on this layout. And, yeah, I mean, frankly, most engines go faster than that, with that much power. That's okay. I mean, we've got more power if we want to go faster. In all fairness, I have to say this Bachmann Easy Track seems to work pretty well on the whole. It has non-isolated points, so the wiring was a bit complicated for it, but... We're going through the station. Let's see if we can... Oh, I don't know, I'm just trying to see the train going by a bit more here, but I'm not sure it's that well in focus. Yeah, I'll chase the train here. Huh. nice coaches in their way. There's some oddities with them a bit. They've got weights in them, which helps, although I don't think it would hurt them to be a tiny bit heavier. They wobble a tiny bit, I think. I don't know. It's not very noticeable, the wobble. It's actually hard to see in the camera, but I do think there is a bit of a tendency to wobble. Whoops. I was trying to get down to the controller there, and I... Well, I mean, what you're going to say, but there you go. Such as they are, 3 kit-built Dapol LMS coaches.